The mountains of Colorado were known for their beauty, sharp ridges, deep forests, silence heavy as sky, but in winter, they turned brutal. On this night, the storm was a monster. Winds howled between pine trunks like sirens. Snow whipped sideways, reducing visibility to almost nothing. Lena Ward gripped the steering wheel with both hands, knuckles white beneath her gloves. The windshield wipers scraped a losing battle against the thick, wet snow. Her breath came fast, not from fear, but focus. She was 28, new to the mountain EMT rotation, and this was her first full blizzard run. Beside her, Dr. Jonah Reeves studied the dispatch report glowing on the tablet. Accident reported 6 miles ahead. Vehicle flipped. No contact with driver. Road crew hasn't reached the site. Lena nodded. We'll get there first. Jonah glanced at her. Dark hair pinned back tight. Eyes narrowed. Jaw set. She had the look of someone who had something to prove. He respected that. But tonight, everything was unpredictable. The ambulance cut through snow like a stubborn beast. Tires chained, engine groaning, headlights lit up only swirls of white and the occasional blurred shape of a tree. Then, without warning, something darted into view. Lena, brake. She saw it a fraction before Jonah shouted. A shape in the road. Massive and still. Not a deer. Not a coyote. A dog. Lena slammed the brakes. The ambulance skidded, fishtailing slightly before grinding to a stop. The red and white lights strobed across the snow-covered road, painting the night in pulses. The dog didn't flinch. It stood directly in front of the vehicle, framed by blizzard and light. A black German shepherd, larger than average. Powerful, with fur speckled white by snow. Its ears were erect, eyes glowing amber, locked on Lena through the windshield. It wasn't scared. It wasn't lost. It was waiting. What the hell? Jonah murmured. Lena opened the door and stepped into the storm. Snow bit at her cheeks immediately. The wind pushing hard against her parka. Hey, she called. You okay, buddy? The dog didn't move. She took a few steps forward, squinting through the snow. You lost? Still. It just stared. Then, in one sudden, smooth movement, the dog turned and ran into the trees on the left side of the road. Not wild, not frantic, deliberate. Lena hesitated, then looked back at Jonah. Did you see that? I saw it, he said, stepping out to join her. That wasn't normal. It was acting like it wanted something. She looked at the dense tree line where the dog had vanished. It wants us to follow. Jonah frowned. Lena, we've got an emergency ahead. This is the emergency. Jonah didn't argue, not because he was convinced, but because something about the dog's eyes had unsettled him. Too, there was intelligence there, and intention. Grabbing flashlights and gear, they locked the ambulance and followed the paw prints into the trees. The snow muffled everything. Branches sagged under the weight. Wind whistled, but more distant now, as if the forest swallowed it. The paw prints were clear, large, steady, leading them deeper. After 10 minutes, Jonah paused. We need to be smart about this. What if we get lost? Lena was already kneeling. She'd found something. a streak of red in the snow. Not much, just a smear. Half frozen, but enough. She pointed ahead. Blood. Come on. Another 100 yards in, they saw it. A second trail of blood, thicker now. Broken branches. A fallen glove. And then, slumped against a tree, half buried in snow, a man. Lena dropped to her knees beside him, brushing snow from his face. He was young, maybe early 20s, lips blue, skin pale. His eyes barely flickered as she checked for a pulse. Hypothermic, Jonah said, already unpacking warming packs. Fractured leg, probably internal bleeding, vitals fading. If we hadn't, she looked toward the trees. Scanning. The dog was there, watching from the ridge above them. Still and silent. It had led them right here. Hey, Lena whispered to the animal. Locking eyes again. Good boy. The dog didn't move, but it didn't leave either. Together, she and Jonah worked fast, stabilizing the man, wrapping him in a thermal blanket, administering fluids. Minutes mattered now. Hypothermia was relentless. As they carried him back through the storm, Lena looked over her shoulder once more. The black shepherd was gone, back into the forest, but his prints remained. Back at the ambulance, the heater roared as Jonah radioed in their status. The young man, later identified as a stranded college student, was unconscious but stable. Lena stood at the front of the vehicle, staring out into the storm. Snow was falling lighter now. The wind had eased. Jonah joined her, rubbing warmth into his gloved hands. You think someone owns that dog? She shook her head. No collar, no tag. Too smart for feral, too alone for owned. He nodded. It's like he knew. Lena looked up at the dark ridge the dog had vanished into. He did. She didn't know who, or what, the dog was. But something inside her had changed. The storm had brought him together. And in that moment, in the midst of ice and darkness, something more than instinct had passed between them. A message. A beginning. The snowstorm eased into a steady, silent fall, but the cold remained bone deep. After stabilizing the injured college student in the ambulance, Lena and Dr. Jonah were preparing to drive back when they saw him again. The black German shepherd. He stood at the edge of the road, body half shrouded by pine branches. Amber eyes locked on theirs. This time, there was no waiting, no hesitation. He turned and trotted back into the forest, casting only a single glance over his shoulder. He's not done, Lena said. Jonah sighed, exhausted but alert. You're serious? We follow. There was no arguing with her tone. Jonah grabbed the med bag, and Lena switched on her headlamp. They left the engine running and followed the dog's fresh tracks into the trees once more. The dog led him up a narrow, uneven path flanked by thick pines and snow-laden underbrush. The trail wound higher, steeper, and rougher, the wind howling like a warning. But the shepherd didn't slow. He climbed with purpose, pausing only to ensure they were still behind. After nearly 20 minutes of hard hiking, they reached a small clearing. A cabin sat crooked at the center, an old A-frame structure of dark timber and sagging shingles. No smoke from the chimney. No lights. Half buried in snow. Looks abandoned. Jonah muttered. But Lena was already moving. The shepherd dashed ahead and began barking, circling the front porch. His claws scraped furiously against the warped wooden door. "He's trying to get in," Lena said, heart pounding. She rushed to the door, shoved it open with her shoulder, and stopped cold. Inside, the cabin was dark and frigid. The power had gone out. Books lay scattered across the hardwood floor, and one of the railings leading up to the loft had snapped. At the base of the stairs, crumpled on the ground, was a man. "Jonah!" she yelled. They moved fast. The man was older, late 60s. White beard frosted with breath. One leg twisted unnaturally, a gash on his temple half frozen with blood. He was dressed in wool layers, but they were soaked through. His skin was cold, lips pale, no pulse. Jonah said, "Wait, slow, Freddy. He's alive." Lena knelt and touched his neck, then pulled her stethoscope from her coat. "Barely," she whispered. "Let's move, carefully," while Jonah prepped a warming wrap and spinal brace. Lena turned toward the dog, who had stepped just inside the door. Snow clung to his black coat. His breaths came fast, visible in the cold. A dull glint caught her eye. A tag on his collar. She moved closer and read the engraved name. "Shadow. If found, please contact Walter Crane." She froze, then looked back at the man on the floor. "Walter Crane," she said softly, "the reclusive novelist." Jonah glanced up, surprised. "You know him? Everybody in Colorado knows of him. 2 bestsellers. Then disappeared from public life a decade ago. Built a cabin in the mountains. Turned into a ghost." Jonah looked at Shadow. "Looks like his dog didn't let him vanish completely." They lifted Walter carefully onto a makeshift stretcher. Shadow followed every movement, never more than a foot away. He whined when Walter groaned faintly, the first sound he'd made. As they loaded Walter into the ambulance, Lena gave Shadow a gentle scratch behind the ears. "You knew he was in trouble," she whispered. "You came down in that storm. Found us. Blocked the road. You didn't give up." Shadow nudged her glove with his nose. Lena looked at Jonah. "He rides with us." Jonah gave a small nod. "No argument here." Back in town, the team worked fast to rewarm Walter's body and treat the head trauma and hypothermia. Jonah stayed to consult, but Lena sat with Shadow just outside the trauma bay, wrapped in a blanket, hand resting on his back. She couldn't stop thinking about it, the timing, the terrain, the sheer determination of a single dog to save his person. If he hadn't blocked the road, if she hadn't stopped, if she hadn't listened, Walter would have died alone, frozen and forgotten at the base of his stairs. But he hadn't, because Shadow had refused to let that happen. "He's not just a dog," she said aloud, softly. "He's a partner." As if in agreement, Shadow leaned into her side. Later that night, as snow resumed its gentle fall outside the clinic windows, a nurse walked out and nodded. "He's stable." He asked for his dog. Lena smiled. "He's right here." When they let Shadow into the room, he padded over to Walter's bedside and laid his head gently on the mattress. Walter, now wrapped in warm blankets, managed a weak chuckle, There you are, old friend. Knew you'd figure it out. Shadow closed his eyes. Content. And Lena, standing quietly in the doorway, watching the reunion, felt something shift in her chest. Not just awe, not just relief. Purpose. Some calls are fate disguised as emergency. And sometimes, heroes don't wear uniforms, they have fur and amber eyes. And they refuse to let you die alone. By the third day, Walter Crane was stable but still weak. His body recovering slowly under a mountain of warm blankets and IV fluids at Pine Hollow General. Shadow hadn't left his side once. The large black German shepherd lay curled on the floor near the hospital bed, unmoving except to shift slightly anytime someone entered. Always between Walter and the door. Always watching. It wasn't just loyalty, it was protection. Lena noticed it immediately. She had come by with fresh gauze and a new thermal pack. But when she approached the bed, Shadow's ears pinned slightly and his eyes narrowed. Not a growl, just a warning. Subtle, but firm. "It's okay, boy," Lena said gently. "I'm just here to help." Walter stirred, his voice gravelly from disuse. He doesn't trust people these days. He rasped. "Not after what happened." Lena looked at him. "You mean the fall?" Walter's eyes flicked toward her. Then, slowly, he shook his head. "No," he said. "Not the fall." Lena hesitated. "Walter, when we examined you that night, I noticed something. On your wrist." She pulled a photo from her pocket, one she'd taken with her phone. Strictly as a record, it showed a small, precise puncture on Walter's inner arm. The kind made by a hypodermic needle. "I think someone injected you with something before you fell. That wasn't just an accident. You were poisoned." Walter didn't react with shock. If anything, his face hardened. "I suspected," he said. "Didn't know for sure." Lena pulled up a chair beside him. "Why would someone do that? And why you?" Walter looked at Shadow, who sat up slightly at the sound of his name. "Because of what I wrote. Or what I was about to write." He gestured weakly toward the table beside the bed. "In the drawer. Take it." Lena opened the small compartment and pulled out a thick folder. Pages crumpled and marked with red ink. Paperclips barely holding chapters together. The title on the first page stopped her cold. "The Forgotten Verdict," by Walter Crane. As she flipped through the manuscript, the fragments of the story came into focus. A fictionalized but heavily detailed account of a 1997 murder trial in Denver. A teenage boy accused of killing his foster father. The case was closed with a guilty verdict. But Walter's writing suggested something else. Evidence that had gone missing. Testimony that was suppressed. And names, powerful ones, buried in footnotes disguised as fiction. "This isn't a story," Lena said quietly. "This is testimony." Walter nodded. "I changed just enough to protect myself. But someone found out I was writing it. I'd received threats before. Letters. Anonymous calls. But last week, there was one in the cabin." Lena straightened. "It's still there." He nodded slowly. "Top drawer of the desk. Under my notes." She stood. "I'm going back there." "Be careful," Walter said. "They've been watching me for a while. Maybe even closer than I knew." The storm had passed, and the trees glittered with ice when Lena returned to the cabin that afternoon. The place felt different now, not just cold, but heavy, like it had seen too much and told no one. Inside, the air was stale, books lay where they had fallen. Walter's blood had dried on the floor. The broken banister remained jagged and unfinished. She stepped into his study. A fireplace of cold stone dominated one wall, and beside it, a heavy oak desk. She found the top drawer, and beneath pages of scribbled notes and outlines. There it was, a plain white envelope, no address, no signature. Inside, one sentence, typed in all caps. Some stories were buried for a reason. Stop digging or we bury you next. Lena held it in her gloved hands, blood rushing in her ears. This was a warning, and someone had made good on it. She snapped photos, replaced everything exactly as she'd found it, and backed out of the house. As she closed the door, she caught movement at the tree line, a shape, tall and dark, disappearing into the woods. Someone had been watching. Back at the hospital, Lena handed the letter and photos to Jonah, who immediately called in a contact at state law enforcement. "This is serious," he said. "This isn't just about a story. This could be tied to real people, in law, in government, people who don't want the past revisited." Walter, still weak, gave her a faint smile. "Guess I wasn't as invisible as I thought." Shadow stood at attention by the bed again, tense but calm, as if reading every face in the room. "He saved your life," Lena said. Walter looked at the dog with deep affection. "He was a rescue once. Came from a shelter after I lost my wife. I think he saw something in me. The same thing I saw in him. Damage, but not defeat." Lena nodded. "He didn't just protect you from a fall. He tried to get help. He ran into that blizzard and stopped our ambulance. Led us back." Again, Walter's eyes misted. "He's the only reason I'm still here." Shadow stepped closer, resting his head on Walter's lap, pressing gently, not seeking affection, but giving it. Lena stood in the doorway a long time after that, watching them. This wasn't just a loyal pet. This was a guardian. And now, with threats hanging in the shadows and truths buried in pages, it was clear. The danger wasn't over, but neither was the story. The sky over Pine Hollow had turned an angry gray by dusk. A second storm rolled in fast. Heavier than forecasted, snow slammed against hospital windows, and the wind howled like something alive. Communications were knocked offline just after sunset. No phone signal, no internet, no radio. Backup generators kicked in with a low hum, casting the halls in flickering amber light. Inside Walter Crane's hospital room, the atmosphere was tense. Jonah adjusted the IV drip. Lena paced near the door, flashlight clipped to her jacket, her hand never far from the emergency radio that now spit only static. Shadow sat by the bed, ears up, gaze fixed on the doorway like a sentry. "We're flying blind," Jonah muttered, checking his watch. "State support won't get here until morning, if the road's clear." Lena nodded. "We hold until then." Something about the way Walter had looked at her before drifting to sleep had stuck with her. a mixture of fear and resignation. As if he knew the worst wasn't behind him. And he was right. Just after midnight, Lena went to check the back hallway. Following her instincts, she moved past the service exit, where the snow had piled high against the frame. It was colder here, and the hum of the generator was faint. She paused. Something was off. The faintest sound, metal scraping against metal, echoed from below. The basement. Lena drew her flashlight and moved quickly down the stairwell, boots careful on the icy concrete. She reached the basement corridor, empty medical storage, old records, equipment in crates. Then she saw it. The side door, usually locked from the inside, was ajar. Snow was blowing in, light but constant. Someone had come in. She raised her voice. "This is a secure building. Identify yourself." No answer. Just a creak, somewhere deep in the dark. She moved quietly, radioing Jonah on the backup channel. Nothing but static. The interference was total. Back upstairs. Shadow lifted his head, ears alert. Then he stood, silent, still. A second later, he bolted from Walter's bedside, claws clacking against tile, barking sharp and loud. Lena heard it and turned just in time to see a shadowed figure rush up the rear stairwell, straight toward Walter's room. "Jonah, get to Crane now," Lena shouted, sprinting behind. In the hallway, everything moved fast. The intruder, tall, built, face obscured under a knit cap and scarf, shoved the door open. Walter jolted awake with a cry. But before the man could take another step, Shadow hit him like a missile. The dog launched from the side. Teeth bared, snarling, they crashed into the floor hard. The man howled as Shadow latched onto his arm, refusing to let go. Jonah rushed in from the side hallway and tackled the assailant's legs, sending him crashing into the bed rail. Lena was there seconds later, pinning him down, disarming a folding knife pulled halfway from the man's coat. It was over in under a minute. But the impact was unforgettable. The man groaned on the floor. Shadow standing over him, growling low, body rigid and ready. Lena pulled off the man's scarf. Walter gasped. "Eric?" The face beneath the cap was pale, sweaty, older than the photo in Walter's house, but unmistakable. Eric Crane, Walter's estranged adopted son, a man with a sealed juvenile record, a history of domestic assault, and a long absence from his father's life, cut out of Walter's will years ago after threatening several family members during a drunken confrontation. Lena turned to Walter, stunned. "You never said you had a son." Walter's voice trembled. "He stopped being my son a long time ago. When I tried to testify against that corrupted ruling in my draft, he showed up again. Said if I didn't stop, if I didn't change the names in the manuscript, there'd be consequences." Eric sneered from the floor. "You ruined me. I gave you one chance to fix it." Lena looked down at him coldly. "You were the one who drugged him. Tried to silence him for good." Jonah zip-tied Eric's hands and bound his ankles with leftover bandaging. "You're not going anywhere." Outside, the wind still screamed. But inside the hospital, the silence returned slowly. Shadow moved back to Walter's side and stood there, unmoving. The tension broke when Walter reached out and placed a weak hand on Shadow's shoulder. "You saved me," he whispered. Again, Lena crouched beside the dog, stroking his thick fur. He knew, he always knows. And she realized something else. Shadow hadn't just remembered danger. He had waited for it, anticipated it, as if his loyalty came with foresight. They kept Eric detained until sunrise. When state troopers finally broke through the snow and took custody, the investigation reopened. Walter's manuscript, now backed with testimony and evidence, was no longer just a draft. It was proof. And Shadow, the dog no one had expected, the one who blocked roads and guarded the truth, had become more than just a survivor. He was the reason truth still had a voice. By morning, the storm had broken. Sunlight pierced through the cloud cover for the first time in days, casting a warm, golden hue over the snow-laden town of Pine Hollow. The wind had quieted to a whisper, and the once raging blizzard had melted into stillness, a silence filled not with fear, but with breath, warmth, and the weight of survival. Outside the hospital, emergency vehicles began to arrive in force. The state police stepped out in full winter gear, boots crunching over ice, radios crackling with updates. Within minutes, Eric Crane, restrained, furious, and broken, was escorted out the back entrance under tight security. He had no words left to protest, no lies left to hide behind. His threats had failed, the truth had held. Inside, Walter Crane was finally sitting upright in his bed, eyes open, alert, his voice stronger than it had been in days. He'd insisted on one thing above all else, that Shadow stay close. And Shadow had not left. He now lay stretched beside the hospital gurney, head resting near Walter's hip, body still, not from fatigue, but from vigilance. Lena entered the room quietly, a fresh thermal blanket in her arms. She paused in the doorway, struck again by the sight, an old man who had nearly died. A dog who had run through a blizzard to save him, and the kind of bond that no storm could break. Walter looked up, eyes crinkling at the corners. "You came back." Lena smiled. "Had to see it for myself. You've got one hell of a guardian." Walter chuckled softly. "He's more than that. I trained him years ago, not just for obedience, but for survival, mine and his. Hand signals, vocal commands, scent cues. But the instinct, that part's all him." He reached a trembling hand down, brushing Shadow's fur. The dog tilted his head slightly. "Content. There's a trigger phrase I gave him, something only he responds to. But in the end, I didn't need it," Walter said. "He saw the danger before I did. Reacted before I could ask." Jonah stepped in behind Lena, nodding toward the hallway. "Eric's in custody. The manuscript's been taken into evidence. State detectives are combing through Walter's notes. And we've confirmed the trial he wrote about, it was covered up. The kid who took the fall didn't do it." Walter closed his eyes, exhaling. "Then it was worth it. Every word. They carefully helped Walter into the ambulance that would transport him to a more secure facility in Denver. The driver stood ready, warming the cabin, while Lena stood at the open doors, watching as Walter was lifted onto the gurney. Shadow followed without command, jumping into the ambulance with silent authority. He settled immediately at Walter's side, laying his head across the old man's knees. No noise, no fuss, just presence, unwavering and final. Lena stood there, hand on the doorframe, her breath forming soft clouds in the morning air. To her, Shadow no longer looked like just a dog. He looked like a soldier who had finished his mission. "You know," she said softly to Jonah, "we save people all the time. By skill. By protocol. By chance. But this was something else." Jonah nodded slowly. "Yeah, this was faith." They closed the doors gently. The ambulance pulled away, tires crunching on the ice-turned snowmelt. As it disappeared around the bend, the first beam of sunlight broke over the ridgeline, piercing the clouds and casting long golden shadows over the white landscape. The light struck the spot where Shadow had once stood, in the middle of the road during the worst of the storm. Staring through the snow with eyes that refused to give up, Lena watched it for a long moment. A single ray across a field of melting frost. A sign of life rescued. A truth uncovered. And a loyal heart that had waited for the moment it was needed most. She didn't need a medal or a headline. She didn't even need thanks. The sunrise was enough.
Thank you for watching the video. If you enjoyed it, please comment 1. And if you didn't, just hit like. See you in the next videos.